In the winter of 1776, the American Revolution should have ended. The army was freezing, men were leaving, the British were closing in. Even after Trenton, defeat was still the most likely outcome. What followed was not a victory, it was a gamble, one that, if it failed, would have ended the rebellion forever. For the first time in months, the rebellion had struck back. British soldiers had been captured. Weapons, supplies, and artillery had fallen into American hands. Across the colonies, word began to spread that the Continental Army was still alive. But George Washington understood the truth behind the celebration. One victory did not save a revolution, it only delayed its death. The British still controlled New York. They still commanded the sea. They still possessed professional armies, loyalist support, and nearly unlimited resources. To them, Trenton was not a disaster. It was an insult. In New York City, British officers reacted with disbelief, then anger. For months, they had watched Washington retreat, abandon cities, and lose battles. They believed the rebellion was collapsing under its own weight. Now, that belief was gone. General William Howe demanded immediate action. The task of restoring British authority in New Jersey fell to General Charles Cornwallis. A veteran commander, confident and relentless, Cornwallis believed Trenton was a fluke, nothing more than a desperate strike by a cornered enemy. His orders were simple: pursue Washington, force him into battle, destroy the Continental Army before it could recover. British columns began advancing west from New York in force. Red-coated infantry marched with artillery and cavalry support, moving steadily across frozen roads. To them, Washington's army was broken, freezing, and barely holding together. Washington's situation was dire. Many of his soldiers were nearing the end of their enlistments. Some units were days away from dissolving entirely. Men spoke openly about going home. They had families waiting, farms to tend, lives interrupted by war. The army lacked almost everything. Shoes were worn through, leaving feet wrapped in rags. Uniforms were little more than torn coats. Food was rationed carefully. Powder and shot were precious. Winter pressed down without mercy. Men marched through snow with bleeding feet. Frostbite took fingers, toes, sometimes entire limbs. Illness spread quickly through overcrowded camps. On paper, the Continental Army should not have existed anymore. Yet it did. Washington knew that if his army stopped moving, it would be destroyed. If he chose a fixed defensive position, the British would overwhelm him. If he retreated too far, morale would collapse and enlistments would expire. So he chose a different path: movement. As Cornwallis advanced, Washington withdrew slowly, deliberately, always staying just out of reach. Each retreat was calculated. Each mile the British gained was carefully measured. Bridges were destroyed behind the Americans. Roads were blocked with fallen trees. Narrow paths were turned into bottlenecks. Small American units appeared suddenly, fired a few shots, and disappeared again into the countryside. The British were forced to stop, deploy, advance, then repeat the process. Progress slowed. Frustration grew. To Cornwallis, it still looked like victory. Washington was retreating. Washington was avoiding battle. Washington was running out of ground, but Washington was shaping the campaign. He allowed himself to be seen just enough to keep the British following, close enough to inspire confidence, far enough to avoid destruction. Each step pulled Cornwallis farther from his base of supply. Each mile marched deeper into hostile territory. Snow, ice, and mud turned roads into traps for heavy artillery. By early January 1777, the chase returned to Trenton. Near the Assunpink Creek, Washington finally stopped. British forces arrived late in the day and immediately attacked, attempting to force a crossing before nightfall. American artillery guarded the bridges. Musket fire cracked through the frozen air. Again and again, British assaults were repelled. As darkness fell, Cornwallis surveyed the field. Washington, he believed, was trapped. The river behind him, British troops in front of him. Escape impossible. Cornwallis ordered his men to rest. At dawn, he planned to finish the campaign. British campfires burned brightly along the creek. Soldiers ate, drank, and slept with confidence. Victory, they believed, was only hours away. Across the water, Washington prepared his greatest gamble. He knew he could not survive another battle at dawn. Retreat across the Delaware was impossible. Standing still meant annihilation. So he chose deception. American soldiers rebuilt campfires, keeping them burning through the night. Axes struck trees in the distance to imitate fortification work. A small rear guard was left behind to maintain the illusion of an army still in place. Then, quietly, the rest of the army moved. Wheels were wrapped in cloth to silence them. Orders were whispered. Men marched through frozen back roads guided by memory, instinct, and moonlight. Washington did not retreat, he vanished. While British soldiers slept, convinced they had trapped their enemy, the Continental Army marched north, then east, then north again, slipping around Cornwallis's flank. Their destination was bold, almost unthinkable: Princeton. The march was brutal. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Ice covered the roads. Time pressed down with every step. At dawn, American advance units collided with British troops outside the town. The encounter was sudden, violent, and confused. British soldiers pushed forward aggressively. American units wavered. Some began to fall back. For a moment, it seemed the gamble had failed. Then Washington rode forward. Ignoring the danger, he placed himself between his men and the advancing British line. Bullets flew around him. Witnesses later said it was a miracle he survived. His presence stopped the retreat. The line held, then it advanced. American forces surged forward, pressing the British back toward Princeton. Smoke filled the air. Muskets fired at close range. Artillery thundered across the field. British troops attempted a final stand at Nassau Hall. American cannon fire smashed through the walls. Resistance collapsed. Princeton was lost. Washington did not remain. Cornwallis was still nearby. British reinforcements could arrive at any moment. With prisoners taken and supplies captured, the army moved again, slipping away before the British fully understood what had happened. In just 10 days, Washington had crossed a frozen river, defeated a Hessian garrison, escaped a superior British force, and struck again at Princeton. The impact was enormous. British troops abandoned much of New Jersey. Loyalist confidence collapsed. American morale surged. Men re-enlisted. Volunteers stepped forward. For the first time, the rebellion felt real. After Princeton, Washington understood that the danger was far from over. The British Army was still powerful, still organized, still capable of striking back. But Washington's greatest strength was not firepower. It was time. Every hour he stayed free, every mile he moved beyond British reach, made the rebellion stronger. British patrols searched desperately for Washington, often arriving hours too late. Again and again, he was gone. Confidence in the British command began to crack. Orders became cautious, advances slowed. The war was changing shape. Across the colonies, support for the rebellion grew more open. Militias reorganized. Supplies flowed more freely. In Britain, patience wore thin. Questions were asked, costs were counted. In Europe, observers took notice that this was no longer a collapsing uprising. It was a revolution learning how to survive. Washington had not won the war, but he had saved it. The winter of 1776 and 1777 did not end the conflict. It defined it. From that moment forward, the British Empire faced a truth it could no longer ignore. This war would not be quick, it would not be easy, and it would not end on British terms. The revolution was alive.